Hi everyone, today we are going to take a closer look on the options we have to blend maps together. So I'm talking about ground, secondary ground, cliff, secondary cliff, and we're going to add shoreline as well. But before we go into that, let me take this opportunity to present you my first True Terrain approved and especially made for True Terrain material pack. So what I have found that with True Terrain Ultimate you get a lot of materials. However, I always found that sometimes I need additional materials and I've created them, but so I thought why not share them all with you. They are available on Gumroad and later on Blendermarket as well. But yeah, if you want to use them, happy for you to check them out. Maybe you want to buy me a coffee because that's probably the price of the pack I have created here. We're talking about 40 different materials and all come in 1, 2 and 4K resolution, all with individual maps of course. So for this tutorial we are going to use those materials. We're going to use those materials. Okay, so here is my light setup if you want to follow it, and nothing out of the ordinary, and I have an exposure set to -3 and no look filter. I have also, let's just take a look how the lighting looks. This is a Nodescape terrain I have created and scaled it up by 200. I have applied the scale, so the scale is 1, and we are talking about real life dimensions over here. And I've already prepared a water mesh as well, based on lagoon water with some foam and some displacement in here. But right now I have disabled it in the render because we're doing some test rendering and we don't need the water to slow us down here. So let's get rid of the water right now. Let's start with adding, so no subdivision modifier in here as well right now. Let's add a material. And as you know, it always takes the first biome and the first material in here. And that's fine. We are going to take one of my new pack and let's go with it's bright sunny, let's go with something like this and go with 1K. And before we move any further, the scale of the whole mesh should match our scale, and as a rule of thumb I'm going with half of what my scale value was. So 200 times 0.1 would result in 20. I'm going with 10. And this will give me good opportunity to play with the displacement strength of the map itself here. Texture mapping, same thing. 200 would be the map 1-to-1. But as you can see, I mean, it doesn't look bad, and for the cliffs it would actually work, but I'm mainly concentrating now, let me move this over here a bit, on the foreground. So that's far too large in here, so let's go with 50, and that already looks much better. I think we could go even a little bit lower. Let's go with 30. Yep. And then play with the displacement strength. Let's start with 0.5, and it looks good over here, maybe a little bit too much. Bear in mind that we're not having any subdivision modifier in here, so it will be blocky for the time we're playing or setting our materials up. But you know what, right now that's fine with me. So let's start with that. Maybe increase the AO map intensity to 0.5 and make it a little bit darker. But that's not the content of this video, because it is blending, and so we're going to add a secondary ground. Again, click to use, and it will apply the first map of the first biome, and we can already see, if we click on blending, that the black parts are the secondary ground. Fine, but a little bit too much for me. I want this to be really specific and clear to be seen. So if I would reduce the amount of patches to 0, we would only get the secondary ground. So let's increase this step by step, and this looks okay. What would happen with the mask expansion to 0? Only the main ground would be seen. So you have two opportunities to play with the amount of how the mask of ground and secondary ground actually looks like. That is fine for me regarding the amount of patches. And before I go to the optional values here, I'm going to place the map on my mesh by playing with the location here. So let's move this over like so, and a bit over here like so. So you remember, these should be the pebbles and rocks we have already set upon, and here will be our secondary ground, whatever we choose to be. Again, here will all be cliff, so we don't have to worry about that right now. The optional masking gives me more fine-tuning on the way the maps are actually displayed. So something like this looks quite nice, and it looks natural as well. So let's get out of the blending settings and pick something complementary. Let's go with some grass over here, and you can see this looks very shiny. That is because I have set a wet map on this specific map, but you can get rid of this very easily by just clicking roughness to glossy, and you've got it as a standard as well. For the ground, we're starting off with ground, copy values to the secondary, and go back to our secondary. So that actually looks good, but our roughness to glossy has been deleted because we copied the values of the first ground, which didn't have this on. So again, let's bring this in, maybe play with the texturing here a bit, maybe make this even a little bit smaller or bigger. That's larger, something like that. So we get some details of the greens and the browns intermingling and mixing with the pebbles we have set upon. I like that. We are going to decrease the displacement of this, so this sits a little bit below the rocks we have already in here. Honestly, this would already be a fine landscape for any sort of background, but let's move along. So the next thing is cliff. We're going to add the cliff, and if we go into blending here, because it's not a blend setting yet, because we're blending ground materials with the cliff material. So we go over here, go to previewed mode, open this up, and we need the basic, the advanced settings, and the mixed details. Not really, but let's see. First of all, I'm going to decrease the ground cliff coverage, so you can see everything that is white will be cliff. So even here we got some cliff showing through. The edge blend makes it either completely everything will be cliff, or very slope based. parts will be cliffs, so something like this. We can then use the extra details that makes it more realistic by adding more noise, and expand that a little bit, maybe like, yeah, that was good, like so. I find the mouse control a little bit fiddly, probably because my system isn't strong enough. So you use either you put the values in there directly, or you play with the arrows over here. Do we need additional? We can use this, but yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Rather use this one. Okay, so I think that looks fine as a mask. So you can see we've got cliff in here. Let's move over to our burgle pack and use, I don't know, use this one. And instead of copying ground values to the cliffs, let's not get too lazy. I mean, we've got to deal with two values in here. The first one is the texture size, and as the cliff is a very prominent thing within our scene, I'm starting with 200 in here, and that doesn't look bad at all. Let's be brave and put a displacement strength of 1 in here. A little bit too much, well, a little bit, I say a little bit, 0.6. But what I find fascinating is how you can see we've got the cliffs here and here, and if we put this to 1, how the cliffs are going to be pushed out like boulders. So I don't want to reduce it too much, so 0.8, because I like the idea of this and the grass growing over these cliffs. 0.7, and we've got our rocks in here, and that looks okay to me. We could increase the AO, make it a little bit darker, like 0.7, and that's fine. We leave it at here. We can, you know, go over 200 as well, but this is totally up to your artistic choice, something like that. And if you want this, because if we're going to take a look where the water is, we don't have this nice edge visible, so we can just move this. We can just move this up a little bit and set our, yeah, that was actually quite good. So let's get rid of the water again, something like this. Okay, good. Secondary cliff, click to use, and you can see it's sprinkled on top of our first cliff texture. We don't need to go to blending, because blending is the overall cliff. We need to go to blend settings, and over here we've got some different options, so we can play with the scale here. If I'm doing 0.5, it gets 0.1. The mixing, the patches getting bigger. Increase for small terrains, we don't need that. And what we can also do is increase the inner radius or the out, or decrease it. So what we can do is we can actually make just a little spot of secondary cliff available, like so, and position it by, it's like a spotlight. So I'm trying to get this just over here, and let's see how this looks. Not bad. And now we're going to use something from here, maybe something dark. Close the blend setting. What we're going to do before we pick our final texture, we're going to do the same thing. Cliff, copy values to secondary cliff. So we're talking about the same values over here. Go back to our secondary cliff and just pick whatever you like. Maybe this one, I think that works well. Let's go to our settings, texture mapping, and what happens if we do 100 in here and 1 in there. Yeah, let's go with this. You can pick whatever material you want, of course. Now, and I really encourage you to do a mix between the true terrain materials, and if you decide to take my pack as well, mix them together. They really work well. Okay, so last but not least, let's bring in a shoreline. Let's go in here, shoreline, click to use, and let's take a look where the shoreline has been placed, and we can already see it's been placed in here, which is actually a little bit unfortunate because I wanted to show you how you can position your shoreline. But on the other hand, let's make the best out of it. Why is it already in, let's call it the right place? Because as you can see here, this yellow dot is my 0 point. And this is exactly what the shoreline does. It is set from 0 to below, right? So, texture mapping, blend settings, basic. Exactly. So the default setting is location in meters, and if it's 0, it is set to here from down. So if your material is like 600 meters above 0, you have to increase this value. So take a look what happens if I'm putting 50 in here. It takes everything above from 50 meters downwards as shoreline, which I don't want. Now, I also don't want to have so much shoreline. I actually want it to be a little bit lower. This does not provide you with minus levels, but you can put them in manually. So I'm going to go with -10, and then I've got the shoreline here where I want it. The cut-off hardness, if I'm putting that to 1, just makes the edge even more pronounced. So I'm fine with this. I'm going to increase noise and noise seed just to make it a little bit more realistic, and it looks better on a slope like that and not so much with the cliffs in here, but that's just because of the mesh, how we set it up. Now let's take a material for this and go with maybe this sand texture. Don't need 4K, but we've got the sand texture in here, and what I would also recommend is to increase the amount of wetness at least to 0.5, because it will probably be wet on the shoreline. Maybe it's a little bit too much the way our sun is set up, but that's what I would recommend. And here we're going with, let's go 100 and increase the displacement strength to 0.5. Let's get rid of the water and see, yeah, you can see we've got nice, let's get rid of this wetness and maybe just do it like so, Nah, not much of difference. What happens if I'm putting a 1 in here? You know what? I think that's pretty good. I also know we can probably be better with this harsh line, but I just wanted to show you how to put a shoreline into your scene. Now, let's give this a quick render. And it actually should be a pretty quick render, and this is exactly what's happening. So you can see that was done in 8 seconds, and it shows more or less exactly what we can see in our viewport. Okay, so how can we change that and make it a little bit less blocky like those things in here? Now that is the only thing I think. Let's just double check with our ground. Let's do this to 0.5. Okay, and what we're going to do is add a subsurface modifier. And you will see that our faces that have been 101K has now been increased to 405K. So that will definitely tax your system. It's not too much, but it probably will. And I'm going to decrease this because I'm seeing, so it still looks pretty blocky, and that is 1 and 2. So let's make a quick render and take a look how the difference between the render subdivision of 1 and in the viewport and the render of 2, what kind of difference we are getting. It's still pretty quick, and we can already see much more detail in our terrain. However, we also see what's wrong with it. So that looks okay to me. This, not sure about this, but that part is horrible. So what kind of material do we have that makes this? And I think it's actually the cliff with what have we put to cliff? 0.7. So if we put 0.5 in here, it didn't change that. So let's go back to 0.7, 0.8. Cliff secondary, maybe go to 0.4. Didn't do the trick. So the only options we have now is that it is our secondary ground, or even the, well, let's see. I don't think that 0.3 will give us this issue. So is it the shoreline? Could well be 0.3. Yeah, it was the shoreline. Okay, there we go. So let's do another quick render with this fixed. Yeah, much better. Much better. We still got some blocky, but not really uncool things going on over here when we set the water in there as well. So another opportunity to have to get rid of the blockiness is to actually apply adaptive subdivision, which will, as you can see, it's updating the mesh, and we will see in a second when it's done that the whole terrain gets a little bit more rounded. And we can see we still have some issues with displacement over here, but let's give this a quick render as well, but make this another slot so we can compare it. This will take more time than 21 seconds, I'm pretty sure, so probably a minute or something like that. But we're at the end of our follow along video about mixing different materials and terrains, and I hope you also see what kind of different results you can get with materials. Again, if you're interested in getting additional True terrain ready to install materials into your own workflow, happy for you to check the pack out, and hope you find something of use in this video. See you next time.